Right, we're moving on to our second session of the morning, and we have a virtual panel discussion co-hosted by ALLAI AI, asking the AI Act, does it live up to its promise? And to moderate this next session, please give a warm welcome to Lenneke Hoedemaker, the moderator, facilitator, and presenter of this next session.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome in Amsterdam. My name is Lenneke Hoedemaker, and I'll be your moderator for the next 25 minutes. We will be talking the next 25 minutes about the European proposal for an Artificial Intelligence Act, also called the AI Act. Of course, I will not do that on my own. I will do that with five distinguished AI experts. And I'd like to start by introducing Catelijne Muller. She is the president and the co-founder of ALLAI, and ALLAI is the co-host of this panel. So I'd like to start by introducing Catelijne Muller. Catelijne, welcome. Are you there? Yes, I can see you. Hello, Catelijne. I cannot hear you, so maybe the technicians can do something about that. Catelijne, you are the president and the co-founder of ALLAI, and you're also a member of the EESC, the European Economic and Social Committee, and the rapporteur on AI on that. So welcome for joining us. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, and I can hear you. I'm very happy for that. Second, I can see Paul Nemitz. Paul, where are you? Yes, there you are. Hi, hello, welcome. You are a member of the German Data Ethics Commission and the principal advisor to the European Commission on AI Act. So we are very, very happy to have you here today. Welcome. Next in line, I can see him all. No, I don't see him. I was supposed to introduce Iban, but I cannot see him yet. So I start with Virginia. Hello, Virginia. How are you doing? Virginia Dignum, also a co-founder of ALLAI, and you are a professor of ethical and social AI. Welcome, welcome. And then I see Mario Guglielmetti. Welcome, Mario. Legal expert at the European Data Protection Supervisor. So welcome, everyone. And yes, last but not least, we can see Iban Garcia del Blanco. Bienvenidos.
Gracias. Buenos días. Good morning.
Buenos días. You are calling probably from Brussels or España, I'm not sure. You are a member of the European Parliament for the Socialists and Democrats. Welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Well, we know each other already for a couple of minutes, so we decided to go on first name basis. Catelijne, can you tell us, and more importantly to the people in the room and back home, why it is so important to talk about this AI Act?
Yes, absolutely. What we need to know is that this AI Act is the first in the world, the first all-encompassing legal proposal to regulate this technology. Europe is the first to do that, and it is already resonating around the globe. The Biden administration has already announced that they will be looking at whether they should also do something similar in an AI bill. And what this does is it looks at fundamental rights, it takes the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI at its core, and it is saying the time that anything goes is no longer here. So we really need to look at what kind of AI we want in society. And I think for everybody here today, it's really important to be aware of this act. The sooner you know what it's about, what is in it, what you have to do, the better. So I think that for everybody here, it's important to talk about it and to give a first insight in what it is that is going to be regulated.
You as an advisor of the European Commission on this AI Act, can you maybe explain briefly what the overall goal is of the European Commission? What do they hope to reach and to achieve with this act?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm the principal advisor on justice policies in the European Commission. And the purpose of this act is to ensure that AI, which is coming on the European market and which reaches citizens and people who live in Europe, is safe, and safe not only in the classical sense of product safety, but also safe in terms of ensuring that it does the functioning of AI does not infringe on our fundamental rights and fundamental values, the rule of law and democracy.
Yeah, yeah. Iban, I know that you wrote a report last year with recommendations to the European Commission. What were your main recommendations back then, a year ago?
I welcome the legislative proposal for AI from the European Commission. I think it entails a strong message for trustworthy AI in Europe, placing health, safety, and fundamental rights at the core of the regulation. And I share more concretely the general objectives of regulation and its scope, in particular the geographical scope, the risk-based approach with AI systems that qualify as high risk, comply with the stricter mandatory requirements, although we will from the European Parliament working on the high-risk criteria and what the mandatory requirements should be to clarify their scope.
Yeah. Iban, thank you very much. Virginia, you have been working in this field for a very, very long time. Do you think the AI Act covers the technology correctly?
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed, I have been working since the mid-80s developing AI models. I think that the mid-80s, yes, that's how old I am. Anyway, I think that there are, in one end, it's too much, and in other end, it's too little. It is too much because if you look at the definition of AI given in the Act, it actually covers any computer program ever written, and any type of computer program can be covered, which is not bad because it should not be just an Act that reflects on specific types of technology, but if technology impacts our lives, then we should be regulating that digital technology. But what concerned me a bit the most is that the Act tends to see AI as a thing, an entity, something that has a beginning and a end, that has some kind, we can draw a line around it. And AI is much more diffuse than that, is much more difficult to identify in a system what is and what is not AI. And moreover, AI is not anymore just a technology. We really need to see AI as part of a whole social technical environment, and we really need to look at regulation from the perspective of this integration of people, societies, institutions, and technology. So in that sense, we need to really, the Act could be a bit more considering of this type of diffuse technology, which is hard to distinguish from the what is and what is not AI.
Yeah. I want to dive in a little bit now. I understand that both Paul and Virginia have to leave at 10:40. The show was running a little bit late, so unfortunately we have to say goodbye to you within 10 minutes already, but no problem. I'll just shovel around a little bit. I want to dive into two main topics of this AI Act and maybe AI in general. That is the so-called prohibitions and the risk pyramid. And I'd like to start with the so-called risk pyramid of the AI Act. And Mario, I'll get to you in a second. But I know, Paul, that the AI Act has a classification system for low, medium, and high risk. And it looks a lot like a system that you built for your commission. Could you briefly elaborate on that? And then I'd like to go to Mario.
Yes, our assumption is that AI will be as prevalent in our lives as electricity, but the degree of need for regulatory obligations, of course, depends on the context in which the AI program is used and what it can do. And the core of the proposal, therefore, is a risk graduation into four levels of a pyramid. There are some functions which are strictly forbidden, then high risk systems, low risk systems, and no risk systems. And the definitions are, let's say, a mixture of general and abstract, but also some sectoral. So let me just focus in on the high risk. It's very important to realize that very important areas of our public and private lives fall under high risk. And I would just like to mention, for example, anything related to human resources in companies or the public service, from gaining employment right through to performance management, anything in the area of education, anything in the area of law enforcement, migration, asylum, as access to and enjoyment of essential private services, anything related to administrating of justice or democratic process, management of critical infrastructures, and so on. And also all products which are specifically regulated already, all those are in the high risk category. And so it is very important that these different types of uses then perform according to the rules set out in the AI, starting with an impact assessment of the system, and ending with very basic things. For example, making sure that humans always know that they're dealing with the AI rather than a human.
Mario, an AI practice that the AI Act categorizes as medium risk is the so-called emotion recognition. Can you tell us what that exactly is? And what do you think of this classification as medium risk, emotion recognition?
Yes, well, technically for emotion recognition, you have, first of all, the face identification by the machine, by the computer. Then the computer has to detect the emotion, for example, the eyebrows going up or the lips going up. And then it has to interpret this emotion. So this technically is done by machine, and by machine assisted by eventually machine learning, which upgrades it into an artificial intelligence system. So about the legally speaking, emotion recognition is a medium risk, but we have the transparency which has been mentioned, but is transparency enough? Not at all, because we have emotion recognition used against refugees and migrants in Annex 3 of the Artificial Intelligence Act. You have emotion recognition which is used in the context of employment as work management, as emotion recognition from voice or from face. You have emotion recognition we can use by police, and also linked to future intention, detection of future intention, to predictive police. Here at the EDPS is concerned about, of course, it's the human rights and data protection rights point of view. It's not really necessarily business point of view, but we are happy that the Parliament took position on biometric categorization, biometric identification, and emotion recognition, and in connection to this, because we have to see the whole forest instead of looking at the trees. Otherwise, you don't understand this regulation. The Parliament also expressed his strong concerns for predictive police and predictive justice. So as it is, I think, as a matter of fact, we can agree, at least here in the House, from data protection viewpoint, maybe fundamental rights viewpoint, that if not modified as it stands, the Artificial Intelligence Act is a threat to fundamental rights. It's not something which avoids artificial intelligence systems which we would not like. And this is evident with regard to the two things which I mentioned. But it's also evident with regard to other issues which I don't mention, and basically the overarching principle of the parallelism, basically meaning that what is unlawful, and I finish, what is unlawful in the normal world should also be unlawful once we have an AI system used. And this is something we had in the German Commission Ethic Guidelines, that is to look at sectorial laws. That's all for me for the moment.
Yeah, very, very, very important. Catelijne, maybe you can comment on that. I know that there is a list of domains which are considered to be high risk, and you see things like courtroom and the workplace, that they are on the list of high risk. That sounds logical, but I know, Catelijne, that you have some worries. And maybe I take some question already from the audience. Some question already reached me, and maybe you can answer that one as well. The EU has not offered a clear methodology for classification of risk levels. So maybe you can take that with you as well, Catelijne.
Well, to answer your first question, what I see, I understand and I appreciate the fact that not all AI has the same risk, and not all AI is even risky. But what you risk by putting them by classifying all these domains as the Commission does now, is that you mainstream and normalize quite a lot of AI practices that are still heavily disputed. For example, I used to be a lawyer and I went to law school to be a lawyer, and judges also go to law school to be judges. And one of the most difficult things is to read or even write a judgment. So if what we see now on the list is, for example, AI that can help interpret the law related to a certain set of facts, that is exactly what judges and lawyers go to law school for. And I think it's quite a hefty task for the AI in its current capabilities. And it also, we should also remember that, for example, judging, but also decisions about hiring and firing, they're not just about looking at patterns in historical data. They have a lot of human elements in it. Not all decision can be reduced to ones and zeros. So this is where I see this normalization and mainstreaming risk in putting a certain number of domains and practices on the list.
Yeah. And this, no, let me go first to a question to Virginia, because I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes. I think within the risk pyramid, one of the high risks is, of course, the so-called bias. What do you think, Virginia, is necessary to tackle AI bias?
Of course, AI bias is reflecting our own biases, and we are biased by nature, we are biased by necessity, and a lot of what the systems are doing and the type of systems that we do, which are basically identifying patterns in existing data, they will identify those bias. So, of course, the main way to deal with bias is really to awareness of the prejudice that we have, and really education about prejudice. So it's a societal thing. It's not just a technical thing. At the same time, we can and should and are developing techniques which can deal with bias in systems. We can also use the bias that AI identifies as a mirror to us, to show, look, this is what you guys, you people do. It is how you see the world. So we can also learn from these systems. But one risk that I would like to mention before I leave, and if I may go a bit out of the scope of the bias, but it's related, it's the risk of fundamental research and research and innovation in Europe. The issue is that the way research is done across the world, in Europe, but altogether, is that we do it by publishing and sharing our own research, our own findings, our algorithms, our data sets, and so on. We do it in a way that it's meant mostly to develop an advanced science and advance the technology, but we do it increasingly in open source. And AI Act looks at the providers, and rightly so, it focuses on the providers, but those providers are, of course, at the same time using these data sets, these algorithms that we researchers are developing. So if we really have to take the act a bit like to the letter, it will become increasingly difficult for us as researchers to share this type of initial ideas, not fully tested. And so we really need to work in ways that it's possible for researchers to still consider this, to use this peer review and to use this shared learning and shared doing research together in a way that still protects European citizens and the providers from this more less technology or development and implementation ready type of algorithms. So I think that that's something which the Act also needs really to consider.
Okay. Thank you, Virginia, very much. I understand that Paul already left the meeting. He had to go someplace else. I know, Virginia, you might have to leave as well. If you can stay, that would be great.
I'm sorry, I do have to go, so bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye, Virginia. Thank you very much. And Paul, if you're still listening, thank you very much. Okay, let's now, we tackled a little bit the risk pyramid. I'd like to go now into the so-called prohibitions, the bans, what is allowed and what is not allowed. The AI Act is drawing some red lines for certain AI practices, such as social scoring or biometric identification. Mario, your organization, the EDPS, has taken a very strong position on biometric recognition. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yes, thank you very much for your question. Indeed here as EDPS, but also EDPB, so not just the European Data Protection Supervisor, but all data protection authorities. In a joint opinion, EDPS, EDPB called for three things, three prohibitions, which my colleagues also recalled me to remind you, which are the general ban, we saw it on automated recognitions of human features in publicly accessible spaces, such as of faces, but also of guide, fingerprints, DNA, voice, keystrokes, and other biometric or behavioral signals. This is the first one about biometric identification. Then we mentioned already the ban on emotion recognition to infer emotion, except very limited narrow cases only for healthcare, health and health research. And then the third ban is the one now we come to this issue, is the ban on biometric categorizations. First of all, here is the issue which has been mentioned by Catelijne of whether it is scientifically valid to infer, for example, the political orientation of a person from the face of a person, or to infer the sexual orientation of a person from a face. So this is what is basically accepted without really without much ado in the proposal for regulation on Artificial Intelligence Act, where we have this definition, and which is left a little bit hanging without consequences in terms of whether it is on the use. On the contrary, Article 52 explicitly allows police to use biometric categorizations, which is something that, as a matter of fact, usually, I think one of the things was not to use for police the protected grounds, and so on and so forth. In this case, you can even create a cluster, and there is a risk. There is the risk of stereotyping. They say that artificial intelligence becomes racialized, but also sexually oriented, because you can have the prototype developed in order to have the perfect match, the perfect stereotypes, for example, of the heterosexual or the homosexual man, or the left-wing man or the right-wing man. So there is these stereotypizations. And then there is the risk of also of manipulation and lost agency, because especially if you imagine this applied on, for example, on Instagram, this could be really fuel on fire. And especially in a society which has also problems, is not in an ideal situation, this could also be kind of fuel on fire. So there is also this risk, slippery slope argument here in say that biometric categorizations, but and I conclude to be even more strong, because here there is a lot of pressure. I think we need to be strong from a human rights viewpoint, but these are things that I would not be surprised to have seen in Italian racial laws in a 2.0 version of these, and not in a law of the European Union which proclaims compliance with fundamental rights.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mario. I've just been told that I've just been told that we have 5 minutes left. I'd like to ask Iban and Catelijne one last question. Iban, I know that the European Parliament took a very strong stance last week on what should be banned and what should be allowed. Can you tell us very shortly about that? If you are still,
So, AI in criminal law and its use by the police and judicial authorities in criminal matters. The report was quite categorical, stating that AI application used by law enforcement and the judiciary must be prohibited when incompatible with fundamental rights that are at stake. We are talking about human dignity, non-discrimination, freedom of movement, the presumption of innocence and right of defense, freedom of expression and information, freedom of assembly, and the right to an effective remedy and a fair trial, among others. The Parliament in this way has sent a clear signal that fundamental rights are unconditional. Along with the prohibition of AI used for massive social scoring, we were talking about this point now, also proposed by the European Commission, by the way, The European Parliament calls for two clear bans related to these areas: a ban of use of AI and related technologies for proposing judicial decisions, and it is also clearly opposed to predictive policing based on the use of AI.
Yeah. Thank you, Iban, very much. I have much more questions, but unfortunately we don't have time for that. Catelijne, the last question for you. I know that you have also some ideas on other red lines and worries, but considering the time, maybe I'd like to ask to you, what are the next steps in the process, and is there a takeaway message you'd like to give the audience today?
Well, the next steps is that people should know that this is a proposal, so that there's going to be negotiations. For example, Iban is going to be heavily involved in the negotiations at European level, and it might take maybe a couple of years before we actually have an AI Act that will be
what do you think,
binding.
2 years, you think?
I'm not sure.
Too long.
Maybe
Okay.
Iban knows, but it might be in those realms, absolutely.
Okay.
But what I think is that people should realize that what we heard today, that there is a pretty strong discussion going on what should be prohibited. I mean, this is really meaning bans on a technology that you might be building right now. Please take that into consideration. There will be elements of AI that are considered high risk, and there will be a lot of requirements that you have to comply with then. But the final message that I think I should try to bring here is that we hear a lot people say, don't regulate, it's going to stifle innovation, move away from this regulation. And I do not agree with that. It's unfortunate that Virginia is not here, because she also really disagrees with that. What this act can do...
Why?
What this act can do is can lift the quality of the AI that we build, while at the same time protect the society that we want to live in. And it can be used as a stepping stone for better innovation. We can do a lot of things really easily, but then we have crappy AI, and it's not gonna work, and it's gonna have a lot of problems. And this can really lift Europe up in high quality AI. And as a final thing, as for people that think that China and the United States will move ahead and they will bring all their products into Europe and we will have to deal with those products, then that is simply not true, because this act will cover everything that's going to affect Europeans. So people should really take note of this, take it into account, and keep asking question zero. What is the society that we want? What do we want in this society? How do we want to live? And can we explain it to our children once it's there?
Yeah. Well, Catelijne, thank you very much. And of course, the other panelists. I think we could continue talking about this for hours, maybe weeks. And I think that should be done by everybody in the audience and in society. So thanks again to all panelists, also the ones who left already. And there is no Q&A, I understand. So I'd like to give back the floor to Babita. Back to you. Thank you all.